Story 1: Haunted Submarine. In 1989, the USS Proteus, a nuclear submarine of the U.S. Navy, was tasked with conducting an investigation in the Bermuda Triangle area after numerous ships and aircraft mysteriously vanished. The Proteus carried 110 crew members and the most advanced equipment. Strange beginnings. As the Proteus entered the Bermuda Triangle area, the radar began showing strange signals. On the screen, a large, odd shape appeared, resembling an ancient ship. But as they moved closer, it vanished like an illusion. In the engine room, engineers heard faint tapping sounds, as if someone was knocking on the hull. However, upon inspection, there was no issue either inside or outside the vessel. The lights on the submarine flickered on and off intermittently. During the blackouts, some sailors claimed they saw figures walking down the hallways, even though the ship had a clear shift schedule. The Proteus began experiencing unimaginable phenomena. The compass spun wildly, and navigation equipment indicated the ship was moving in circles, despite the engineers confirming the ship was moving forward. In the engine room, the sound of cold ducts began to echo throughout, and damp hands appeared on the metal walls. Sailors placed their hands on the ship's hull and felt as if they were touching human skin. The chief sailor, Colonel Carl Simmons, took a flashlight out to the deck to investigate. When he shone the light into the distance, it caught the figure of a dark shadow moving swiftly into the darkness. Carl's wristwatch began spinning backward. Some sailors heard the sound of children giggling, even though there were no women or children aboard the ship. Mysterious notes began to appear in the captain's room with the words, "The one who comes after." These were written in blood with no known source. One sailor claimed to have seen his deceased father sitting on a bed in his cabin. In the food storage, the food began to mold rapidly, as if time was speeding up. After experiencing these strange phenomena, the Proteus completely lost contact with land. A month later, a single sailor was found drifting at sea by a cargo ship near the Bermuda Triangle area. The sailor woke from a coma and claimed that the strange events on the Proteus had only just occurred the day before. However, upon inspection, his body showed signs of prolonged malnutrition for a month, and his hair had turned completely white. The Proteus has still not been found to this day. In 1989, the USS Proteus, a nuclear submarine of the U.S. Navy, was tasked with conducting an investigation in the Bermuda Triangle area after numerous ships and aircraft mysteriously vanished. The Proteus carried 110 crew members and the most advanced equipment. Strange beginnings. As the Proteus entered the Bermuda Triangle area, the radar began showing strange signals. On the screen, a large, odd shape appeared, resembling an ancient ship, but as they moved closer, it vanished like an illusion. In the engine room, engineers heard faint tapping sounds, as if someone was knocking on the hull. However, upon inspection, there was no issue either inside or outside the vessel. The lights on the submarine flickered on and off intermittently. During the blackouts, some sailors claimed they saw figures walking down the hallways, even though the ship had a clear shift schedule. The Proteus began experiencing unimaginable phenomena. The compass spun wildly, and navigation equipment indicated the ship was moving in circles, despite the engineers confirming the ship was moving forward. In the engine room, the sound of cold ducts began to echo throughout, and damp hands appeared on the metal walls. Sailors placed their hands on the ship's hull and felt as if they were touching human skin. The chief sailor, Colonel Carl Simmons, took a flashlight out to the deck to investigate. When he shone the light into the distance, it caught the figure of a dark shadow moving swiftly into the darkness. Carl's wristwatch began spinning backward. Some sailors heard the sound of children giggling, even though there were no women or children aboard the ship. Mysterious notes began to appear in the captain's room with the words, "The one who comes after." These were written in blood with no known source. One sailor claimed to have seen his deceased father sitting on a bed in his cabin. In the food storage, the food began to mold rapidly, as if time was speeding up. After experiencing these strange phenomena, the Proteus completely lost contact with land. A month later, a single sailor was found drifting at sea by a cargo ship near the Bermuda Triangle area. The sailor woke from a coma and claimed that the strange events on the Proteus had only just occurred the day before. However, upon inspection, his body showed signs of prolonged malnutrition for a month, and his hair had turned completely white. The Proteus has still not been found to this day. Story 2. Fateful Flight. In 1974, flight number 709 of Atlantic Airways took off from Miami to Bermuda. On board were 120 passengers and crew, including Captain Richard Hayes, an experienced pilot with decades of flying over this area. As the flight entered the airspace of the Bermuda Triangle, the sky suddenly changed color from clear blue to an eerie gray. It wasn't due to clouds or rain, but as if the light had been sucked away. The communication signals with air traffic control became distorted, and the clocks on the plane all stopped working. The passengers aboard began to sense something was wrong. A woman screamed as she saw a shadowy figure outside the airplane window, despite the plane being at an altitude of over 10,000 meters. Other passengers also claimed to have seen the silhouette of dark, clawed hands pressed against the windows from the outside. Inside the cabin, strange sounds echoed. A cold, distant laugh and whispers in an indecipherable language crept through the rows of seats. Many passengers felt their seats shaking, even though the plane remained stable. Some reported that their seatbelts tightened on their own, as if someone was pulling them from behind. In the cockpit, Captain Hayes and the crew faced phenomena that could not be explained. The readings on the control panel fluctuated wildly, and the electronic compass pointed in only one direction, despite all efforts to adjust it. A strange greenish light suddenly enveloped the plane, and in that moment, the crew claimed they saw shadowy figures glide past the cockpit. One passenger, a scientist carrying a briefcase with strange specimens, found that when the greenish light enveloped the cabin, the briefcase suddenly opened, despite being securely locked. A cold breeze emanated from inside, and passengers nearby began to hear whispers. "They're coming." The plane's electronic systems flickered on and off, while the cries and screams of passengers echoed throughout. One passenger claimed to have seen the figure of Captain Hayes standing at the back of the cabin, even though he was clearly still in the cockpit. Strange shapes appeared on the security screens, moving back and forth through the cabin. After being trapped in the green light for a period of time, the plane suddenly shook violently. A loud explosion rang out, and all signals from Flight 709 disappeared from the radar. The plane vanished without leaving any trace. 3 days later, on Elbow Beach in Bermuda, 3 passengers were found unconscious on the sand. They were severely dehydrated and panicked, but had no serious injuries. When they regained consciousness, all 3 could not remember what had happened during the flight. They only said there was a green light and whispers echoing in their minds before losing consciousness. One of them, a young woman, described seeing shadowy figures standing around her in a dream, but they didn't harm her. The 709 aircraft and all the remaining passengers were never found. The mysteries of what happened during the flight continue to baffle scientists and investigators. The only thing that is certain is this: the 3 survivors carried an unexplainable sense of unease, as if they were still being watched by something from within the darkness. Story 3. Lost Merchant Ship. In the 19th century, the merchant ship Emerald Star set sail from Havana, Cuba, to Charleston, USA. It was a large vessel carrying precious goods. Captain John Carter, an experienced man, commanded the ship. The journey took place during a time of rough seas, but Carter and the crew were accustomed to challenges like this. As the ship entered the Bermuda Triangle, the navigation instruments began to malfunction. The compass spun wildly, making it impossible to determine direction. The sailors reported seeing large waves moving unnaturally, as if an invisible force was controlling them. Suddenly, a dark storm appeared. It wasn't just an ordinary rainstorm. The sky and the sea were tinted in an eerie red. Red mist enveloped the entire ship, and strange howls echoed from within the fog. It wasn't the sound of wind or waves, but the cries of suffering souls. One sailor reported seeing the silhouette of an ancient ship, its sails torn and its hull covered in moss, gliding through the mist. The ship made no sound, but the figures aboard seemed to be staring at the emerald star. As night fell, the strange events grew more terrifying. Some sailors disappeared without a trace, while the remaining ones began to see the figure of a woman appearing in the mist. She wore a tattered white dress, her long hair obscuring her face. But when she turned her head, her glowing red eyes and chilling smile horrified everyone. Those who were mesmerized by her gaze threw themselves into the sea unconsciously, as if being pulled by an irresistible force. Captain Carter, in an effort to salvage the situation, tried to command the crew to keep their spirits up and resist the strange phenomena occurring aboard the ship. Another strange occurrence appeared. On the ship's deck, doors kept opening and closing without any wind. Footsteps echoed from the lower cabins, but when they checked, no one was found. Some sailors swore they heard their names being called from the water, the voices familiar yet eerily ghostly. Another sailor claimed to have seen a blood-stained handprint on the ship's cabin wall, but when others came to check, there was nothing but the cold wall. Many began to experience headaches and ringing in their ears, as if an invisible pressure was weighing down on them. Carter wore a silver necklace, a family heirloom passed down from his ancestors. In the final moments, as the storm raged and the ship broke apart, the necklace suddenly shone brightly, as if protecting him from the dark forces. The light from the necklace dispelled the darkness and the terrifying images before his eyes. In that moment, Carter also saw the image of his father, faint but stern, standing in the light from the necklace. He seemed to hear his father's voice saying, "Don't give up, John. Fight." A powerful storm finally destroyed the Emerald Star. Captain Carter was the only survivor, found clinging to a piece of the ship's wreckage drifting in the ocean. When rescued, he couldn't remember exactly what had happened. Only his eyes still shone with sheer terror. Carter recalled that in the final moments before losing consciousness, he heard the voice of the woman echo, "You may escape this time, but the curse is still there. Be ready to face it again." When he awoke, Carter realized the necklace was no longer around his neck. He couldn't explain what had happened to it, but he believed that it was the very thing that had helped him survive. Though safe, Carter could not escape the strange dreams. In those dreams, he found himself back in the Red Sea, facing eerie shapes and the whispers, "You cannot escape forever." Story 4. The Eternal Glow Ship. In 1992, the luxury cruise ship Eternal Glow, carrying 85 passengers and crew, set sail from Puerto Rico to Miami. It was the maiden voyage of this state-of-the-art vessel, equipped with the latest technology of the time. However, as it ventured into the Bermuda Triangle, the ship mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind chilling tales. As the Eternal Glow sailed deeper into the Bermuda Triangle, the crew spotted an old, dilapidated ship drifting in the mist. Strangely, the entire ship was illuminated by bright lights, despite its obvious abandonment. The crew felt an eerie pull, as if the glowing ship was inviting them closer. One sailor claimed to see a figure waving from the deck, but as they approached, the ship vanished into thin air like an illusion. At night, passengers aboard the Eternal Glow began hearing classical music echoing through the cabins. The haunting melody of a piano and a faint, wordless voice seemed to come from the grand ballroom, even though it was completely empty. Curious passengers ventured to investigate and swore they saw a woman in a glittering 19th century evening gown playing the piano. But as they approached, she disappeared, leaving the piano keys moving on their own. Captain James Miller noticed that the ship's compass began spinning counterclockwise, and all the digital clocks on board suddenly displayed the date, March 12th, 1892, exactly 100 years in the past. Stranger still, one crew member claimed to see an old photograph of himself hanging on the wall in the captain's quarters. The photo appeared aged and was dated to the same year, 1892. As night fell, the ocean floor began to glow with shimmering green lights, as if an underwater city was coming to life. Passengers gathered on the deck to witness the mesmerizing sight. Suddenly, an invisible force dragged one passenger into the sea. Despite the crew's frantic efforts to save them, the passenger vanished without a trace, leaving only their terrified scream echoing into the night. On the final night before the ship's disappearance, passengers began noticing a strange man in a black suit wandering the deck. He didn't speak to anyone and simply stared silently at the ocean. When one passenger approached to ask who he was, the man turned around, revealing glowing eyes and a chilling smile. Hours later, the entire ship, along with its passengers and crew, vanished without a trace, leaving only a life preserver with the words "Eternal Glow" washed ashore on a beach in the Bahamas. To this day, fishermen claim that while passing through the area where the eternal glow disappeared, they can still see its lights shining faintly in the distance. However, anyone who dares approach never returns. The eternal glow has become a haunting legend of the Bermuda Triangle. Story 5. The Phantom Crew of the Atlantis Dawn. In 1981, the cargo ship Atlantis Dawn departed from New Orleans, bound for Gibraltar with a shipment of industrial equipment. It carried a crew of 42 seasoned sailors, led by Captain Robert Graham, a man known for his calm and unwavering leadership. As the ship entered the Bermuda Triangle, it became the centerpiece of a mystery that would baffle the world. As Atlantis Dawn sailed deeper into the triangle, a dense fog rolled in out of nowhere. Unlike normal fog, it wasn't damp or cold, it was eerily warm. Crew members began hearing whispers coming from the mist. The whispers spoke in strange, fragmented phrases. "Turn back. Leave us. The water remembers." Some sailors claimed the voices sounded like their deceased loved ones, calling their names. One night, as the fog thickened, the crew noticed something bizarre. The reflection of the Atlantis Dawn on the water below began to ripple and distort unnaturally, as if the ship's shadow had a life of its own. Suddenly, the reflection vanished entirely, even though the sea was calm and the moonlight was clear. Moments later, crew members on the lower deck reported hearing footsteps on the water, circling the ship. On the third night, the ship's watchman, Henry Miller, failed to report for his scheduled shift. When the crew searched for him, they found him standing at the bow, staring out at the ocean. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and his face was frozen in an expression of terror. No amount of shaking or yelling could snap him out of it. When they moved him to the infirmary, they found his skin ice cold despite the tropical heat. Crew members navigating the ship's lower decks began to notice a strange phenomenon. Hallways that were normally just a few meters long now seemed to stretch endlessly, disappearing into darkness. One sailor, trying to reach the engine room, walked for what felt like hours without finding the door. When he turned back, he claimed he saw a figure standing at the far end, watching him. The figure had no face, only a dark void where features should have been. On the final night before the ship's disappearance, the remaining sailors heard a commotion on the upper deck. When they rushed to investigate, they were shocked to find another crew working silently alongside them. These phantom sailors appeared translucent and wore uniforms from an older era, perhaps the 18th century. They moved in perfect unison, their faces devoid of emotion. When Captain Graham tried to confront them, they all turned in unison, pointing toward the ocean. A voice, deep and resonant, boomed across the ship. "You are trespassing where time stands still." Shortly after the Phantom crew appeared, the Atlantis Dawn vanished from radar without a distress signal. Search efforts yielded no debris or clues, except for a single life ring with the ship's name, found floating near the Sargasso Sea. Years later, a fishing boat passing through the Bermuda Triangle reported spotting a ship matching the Atlantis Dawn's description. It appeared intact but eerily quiet, with no signs of life on board. As the fishermen approached, the ship vanished into the fog, leaving behind only the faint sound of whispers on the wind. The Atlantis Dawn remains one of the Triangle's most unsettling mysteries, a story of a ship caught in a realm where time and reality blur.